time is 5 p.m. We have some legislation that we want to discuss regarding convenience stores. So I'm going to turn it over to Councilperson Colosimo Testa. And she has some legislation, she has some information she had printed out for us. And then if we have any questions, we'll address any questions as we go along.
Okay, thank you. So I'll start off with the legislation and codes committee. That's the first one. So when I was doing some research on how to present the legislation, I came across some pieces that were in committee back in 2021 after the zoning code was passed. So if you look at if you go onto the second page where it says ordinance number 3, where it says at the bottom, it says be further ordained that this ordinance and amendment.
Where are you?
Oh, I'm sorry, this one right here.
Oh, the other, okay.
These ones, this one right here.
Okay.
This one. So, yeah, it says Legislation and Codes Committee, July 14th. If you go to the second page, it says at the bottom, it says, be it further ordained that this ordinance amendment to the zoning law shall not become effective until such time as all procedures described in section 2-29, 121 to 125 have been completed. So this legislation was actually never passed, it was discharged. So it took me a little time to figure out how they actually passed legislation to amend the zoning code to pass it to them. So I'm going to bring you to this one where it says the memo from Stephanie DeGiorgio that we all got this past month that says, and I highlighted it for you, that the proposed amendment has already been referred to the planning board for report thereon. So if you go to the last page, it says that this ordinance shall take effect immediately. So you have to pass, this is something that I'm going to have to clarify because I don't remember how we did this last month. So the ordinance came up, a resolution provided for a public hearing on the zoning text amendment. So I have to have some clarification on how it gets sent to the zoning board before we can move forward with that. Because I don't remember how when Frank proposed the 2,000-foot rule, how it actually got to the zoning board.
So can I?
Yeah, sure.
Not to the zoning board, but is it gone?
Thank you.
So we had to do this one. I tried to amend the zoning ordinance, about the chickens. So we had to put an ordinance into committee, and then we simply, maybe this isn't your question, we simply instructed the clerk to forward this on to Joe Burke as the chair of the planning board and remind him that he needed to blah, 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 blah. And so at the next planning board, they did blah, 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 and came back to us. And some of us actually went to that planning board meeting to kind of weigh in, and then they gave their recommendation. And then at the next meeting after that planning board meeting, we were able to take it back up.
Okay, so that's just, I just want
We're
to.
good for 1 year on that, right? I think it's coming up in
Getting a
December.
recommendation requires no action.
Right, okay, so that's why I just wanted to clarify past practice, stuff like that,
Right,
how we
right.
actually move forward with this. All right, so let's go to the first page where it says municipal zoning code adopted. This is the first page where it goes through the definitions, the index of how the zoning code works. So what I had to do was that I had to go back and I had to find out what part of the zoning code talked about neighborhood retail, what part of the zoning code talked about smoke shops, and what part of the zoning code talked about convenience stores. So the first thing that we would have to do was go to the definition component of it. So you'll see use tables highlighted, and you'll see there are a couple other proposals in that. So if we've got to refer back to what page that we're going on, because I didn't print the whole document for you guys. I just printed out the parts that needed to be changed. So paperclip that, because that's going to be important to go back to. So let's go to this. I don't know what you're going to look at. What it says for you guys. Take it from there. Okay, where it says, I think it was the top, it was the floodplain one, okay? That should have been the first one, because I still got the full zoning code, so that's why I'm sorry. I should have printed out separate copies for me to have. I'm sorry, you should be on the second thing that I told you to go on, where it says flood areas, gross, gasoline convenience stations. Okay, so in my understanding, it says gasoline convenience station, okay? So any area of land, including structures thereon, that is used for the sale of gasoline, oil, or other, so on and so forth, that says gasoline convenience station. So this is gonna be my recommendation to the council, and this is obviously what we're here for to discuss. So what I would like to do is I would like to eliminate convenience stores from that part of the section where it says gasoline, okay? And then add on page 16 where it says add the definition of convenience stores. So what I did was I went back to the old zoning code and I found out what the definition we had for convenience stores was. So a convenience store was defined as retail businesses of less than 6K gross feet with specialized household products, so on and so forth. Okay? And that's obviously what the definition of convenience stores is going to be. It's almost similar to what the neighborhood retail was, but since you give out a separate permit for the convenience store legislation, I think it should be defined as in. And it was a more lengthy of a definition towards convenience stores, and I'll read that to you.
Yeah, isn't there a definition in the licensing legislation?
I don't have, but it's not. It doesn't follow the code of this.
Well, because it's separate.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So I kind of want to. So whatever. So it's probably similar to what I'll read to you, and I don't know. The license wasn't attached to this. So
You want me to go look that up?
yeah, if you don't mind, because I'm pretty sure it's got to be similar to the one that we used to have.
It's gotta be in my office.
Yeah. So if you can. So what we had before, and I'll read this to you.
We're on page 21 here.
Yes.
Gasoline convenience, but
Yep.
now you said something about page 16.
Yep. So I would have to add the definition of convenience stores,
Well, we
just
don't
in
have that in front of us now.
just in alphabetical order. Just
Just trying to follow.
yeah, no, that's fine. And trust me, it's very confusing when I'm trying to piece apart a 160-page document. So it says, this was the old code, it says in accordance with section 2-29-4 of the zoning ordinance of the city of Utica, convenience store is defined as any retail sales business of less than 6,000 square feet of gross floor area per floor, which specializes in providing household products and foods, and may also provide for any of the following as an accessory use: the sale and/or rental audio video recordings of any format, provided that an adult-oriented business is specifically prohibited. The preparation of sandwiches and foods, and the use of no more than 2 amusement devices such as pinball machines, video game machines, or other similar devices. Neighborhood convenience stores shall not include the dispensing of gasoline or other motor vehicles. And then it goes on to that follows the old zoning code. So that was the similar definition that we used to have for convenience stores. So if we eliminate it from gasoline, we would have to add its own definition to page 16, just to have it in alphabetical order, which would define convenience stores. Now, when I read the go ahead. Yeah,
But
go
a
ahead.
convenience store, let's just say Stewart's, that is larger than what?
But that wouldn't be considered a convenience store. That would be considered a gasoline station because it has pumps attached to it. So I kind of think that we should separate convenience stores.
Right, because we have the neighborhood retails, the little ones, and remember we talked about that they're in the code that we wrote for that, we kept them fairly small. And we wanted to make sure that they were distinct from like Walgreens.
Right.
Which we wanted, because we want those to be regulated differently. And then that's distinct from a Stewart's, which is distinct from, I don't know, is there anything that was just a gas station?
Well,
That doesn't have a convenience store attached to it?
Well, I mean, not,
The place across from Matt's funeral home,
that's just a gas station, yeah. So, I mean, another thing too is you've also got general retail, which follows the code, that could kind of go for, your Walgreens and stuff like that. So it is very separate, but that's why I just believe that just because a convenience store is attached to a gasoline pump, that it shouldn't be, it's not a convenience store, all right?
It's a gas station.
It's a gas station, because even if you look at the one across from like where Bassone's is, that technically has gas pumps, but they're not, and they can't use the gas pumps, so it'll just be a convenience store.
Is the urban market near retail or convenience?
What's that?
The urban market, the Westwood,
That would be considered general retail.
General retail.
General retail, yeah, because it's more than that 6,000 square feet of a building.
Now, you say across from Bassone's that they don't have gas pumps, but back in the day, they did.
Right,
So
working
could
gas.
they put gas
Gas
pumps
in
back
the-
in there?
Working gas pumps, so that's what defines it now as a convenience store. It's not just a convenience store /
But suppose
gasoline.
somebody bought it and opened it and wanted to put gas pumps in.
Then they would have to go apply for the permit for a gasoline station, not a convenience store,
Okay,
which is a whole separate part of the zoning
okay,
code.
so, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, so then let's go to, page, 27. So when I was originally going through it, and I went back to the moratorium that we had, and the moratorium combined neighborhood retail, convenience stores, and smoke shops all in one. So I was thinking originally that maybe we should have combined neighborhood retail, convenience stores, and smoke shops all in one, but they all have special permits and all are differently defined in that. So there's a permit for convenience stores, there's a permit for neighborhood retail, and it goes along with those
The
permitted
neighborhood retail
uses.
is what people call corner stores, these little stores often on a corner.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess,
gas station.
Aren't they even even though, like you're saying across from Bassones, that convenience store and a neighborhood retail, would that be a neighborhood retailer or a convenience store?
well, I mean, I guess that's what the,
Title, right,
yeah.
basically?
I mean, I kind of like the way the old code wrote, because it really kind of just specifically defined the convenience store. Do you get what I'm saying? So if somebody goes and applies for a permit, this is where, and I'll get back into that use table, where now it's gonna be up to the codes department, the zoning board and planning board, or whoever has, gets this permit along with, codes, that they're gonna be allowed to define what's a neighborhood retail and what's a convenience store. Does that make sense? A little bit, kinda? I just think that convenience stores has to be defined in its own use. Okay, so then, that's it, and then we'll get the definition once, Marcus comes back down with that actual definition. So then you go to, no, retail general, no, that could be separate, because again, that could be used as a Walgreens or however the zoning board and planning board defines what they need to put on their application. So that's gonna be up to them, because once we amend the zoning table, it's still gonna have to put a special permit, and that's when they're gonna define what's general retail, what's neighborhood retail, what's convenience store, what's smoke shop, and what's,
So retail general is Walgreens.
from what, yeah, I mean, I guess if you can get it, yeah, and it's not, it doesn't like sell like subs, it doesn't
And
sell
more than-
chicken wings, it doesn't
More
sell,
than 6,000
Right,
square
it's
feet.
more
is
than
Right.
6,000
larger.
square feet.
Right.
It has no gasoline,
right.
and it doesn't have prepared food.
Right. So that's what I was saying when I originally was going through it and I was looking at the moratorium back to that. I was gonna combine all three of those together, but I think, again, keeping them separate, I think it gives the codes department and them a little more leeway to what they think is a convenience store or a smoke shop or something along those lines. So then if you go to page 56, where it says amendments, okay, so here's where I got confused, and this is where I'm not, I guess it's a little upsetting to me that this was added to the zoning code, because it really ties the hands of the common council, that are the actual lawmakers inside the city. I don't mind the fact that you have to go to the planning board, but I shouldn't have to go to the planning board if I have an amendment that I want to put that. So if you look, amendments may be proposed in writing by the mayor, the common council, the commissioner of urban economic development, the commissioner of codes enforcement, the planning board, the zoning board of appeals, so on and so forth. So every one of those parties can make an amendment to the law that was passed, the document that we're looking at now. So if you go to the next page where it says page 57, and it says hearing on proposed amendments, notice thereof. So it says before any amendment, supplement or change in the regulations or district boundaries, there shall be public notice and hearing. That I can agree with, right? Because it gives everybody the opportunity, such as the planning board, zoning board, the codes enforcement officer, anybody from the legislative body to come speak on that behalf. The next problem that I have is that after the public hearing and referral to and report by the planning board, a majority of the council can have it. So if we had the public hearing, I don't know why I still need a referral from the planning board if the public hearing allows them to go to that.
Well, and also, whatever the public, we're perfectly within our right to ignore the planning board. So why ask them for their input if we can ignore it?
And here's the thing, again, and that's another thing too, because I guess I could see the window or the protection that it would give them, that if the council does change something, that they would be able to have a say in it. But again, that's what the public hearing provides for. You still have to provide it for them no matter what. So I guess what happens when the planning board gives a recommendation to the common council for an amendment, who oversees what the planning board is recommending? Us at the end of the day, because we're the lawmakers and the ones that are amending the law. So who's to oversee what they're actually proposing to us? Why do we have to have an oversight? Why don't they? Does that kind of make sense in that form? Okay.
So, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So when it says amendments may be proposed in
Sure.
writing by the mayor. Now,
Turn on your mic, Joe.
So if the mayor makes an amendment, does it still have to come before us, or he can do it on his
No,
own?
the mayor, no matter what.
What?
So
He
the
can do
only,
it?
so the only person that's actually bind to going to the planning board is the common council. So the mayor doesn't have to give a referral to the planning board. He could just send it to us, but we have to call for the public hearing. Okay?
But it has to come before us. He
No
can't
matter
ju-
what, no matter what.
Yeah,
So it's nobody,
right,
we're
okay.
the lawmakers. He's not the lawmaker. He's the
Okay.
executive branch. So
Right.
we're the only ones that make laws.
So he can't just change
Right.
something and do it on
And
his own.
but that's why I was kind of upset, just seeing that the only people that have to go through that extra step is the legislative body. And I don't see how somebody, a previous council or a previous, body that passes something could actually tie the hands of somebody and make them go through these extra steps when technically they're the lawmaker.
Yeah, but it's not, they're not, I don't believe they're going to stop it after the public hearing, a referral to and report by the planning board. They're not doing anything they're just reporting on if it's legal.
No, yeah, I mean, I guess like, what's the difference though?
They're not gonna deny or accept. They're just
Well,
gonna
they
give
could
a
say,
report.
we don't approve what you're trying to pass in front of us.
It would be like saying, it would be like, the equivalent would be saying, the common council shall not amend any section of the code without consulting with the commissioner of codes.
Right. And that's not,
Which is what we do,
But-
right? That's what we do
Right.
anyway.
Right, but I-
And any common council member who says, well, wait a second, I wanna hear from the planning board what they think about this. We always have that right.
right.
To ask the planning board. But why is it written into the law that we have to go to them to ask for their advice?
Right.
Right. So, and that's kind of where I
And
was.
they can give their advice at the public
At
hearing.
the public hearing, right.
Okay, so you want to eliminate, you
Well,
want to shut up?
listen, I'm not gonna get into that, like this, I don't mind the step because it's already there, but we shouldn't have to go through that step. And that's kind of my point, I shouldn't have to get permission as a lawmaker from somebody, because then what's gonna happen when something happens, they're gonna say, well, we told the common council not to do that, but at the same time, it's like, well, we understand that consequence that we take
Right.
with any legislation that we
Right.
pass, that we're responsible for what we put forth.
Right. So I'm with you on this. I guess I'd be interested in hearing, like this came about in it was my first term that we had to do
Yeah.
this, right? What was the thinking? Is there anybody in the room anywhere who can address the question of why this got folded into the new zoning code that was not in the old zoning code?
Yes,
Okay.
we hired Alon to do a study, about how our zoning code could be more efficient and address some of the flaws in codes, flaws with our zoning code and how to improve it, bring it up to date and modernize it. And one of the things that they noticed from dealing with partner cities, they even gave us some sample legislation, is that we had nothing to regulate convenience stores, which were growing.
Oh, no, that's not my question. You
Oh,
walked
no,
in the
no,
middle of my
no.
question.
Listen, nobody disagrees with the zoning code,
You
the way
walked
it's
in the
written.
middle
We
of
just
my
wanted to.
question.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I thought
That's
you
okay.
said, do we know how this
No.
came about?
Yeah,
I'm
it was
late.
the this you
Sorry.
didn't know was referring to.
Yeah.
So my question was, the part of the new zoning ordinance that requires that the common council go to the planning board to ask for their advice prior to amending the zoning ordinance, what was the thinking that led to that being incorporated into the new zoning ordinance? Does that question make, it wasn't in the old zoning code.
Right.
But it's in the new zoning code that we can't change the zoning code without first putting ourselves before the planning board. In fact, we've done that at least once.
Right.
So what I'm asking is, in bigger picture, who thought it was a good idea, and in what way, what would it solve? What problem were we trying to solve by requiring that the common council have any changes to the zoning ordinance be vetted by the planning board?
Especially when they only meet once a month, so even
Right.
like.
So does
council-
anybody
coun-
does anybody know?
No, I think it was for this exact process of
Marcus, do you have no
holding it.
insight?
No, I mean, I would assume, look, it was all put by Alon. That's the board that dealt with it, so the feeling is that implementation, there's no one department. The planning board is gonna do any implementation of of sort of allowing zoning. It's gonna go in front
Right.
of the planning board,
Right.
so they figured that you should have, at least have their input before you pass the law.
Right, but the analogy that I gave while you were upstairs getting copies of this law was, that would be like, we never, like, putting it directly into the city code, that we can't change the city code without consulting with the commissioner of codes, that we can't write a law without, it's
Right.
just like,
It's, you don't, yeah, but you don't have to follow their recommendations.
No, I know.
It's just saying that the due diligence would be to get a recommendation from the people that do this.
but
when they
Sam's
sign
point is
stuff.
that it does necessarily slow down our process, because they meet once a month, we meet twice a month.
I mean, and it's just an extra step for us.
Right.
When at the end of the day, if we know what we're gonna do as a body,
agree
we
wholeheartedly.
shouldn't have to go through that planning board
And I-
process.
and
That's
I
up to
would
you
be in
guys. I
favor-
just, what I think the thinking was
And-
it makes everybody be on the same page.
I would be in favor of taking it out. The irony is, before we take it out, we'll have to ask the planning board if we can take it out.
Yes. And then they'll give us the recommendation.
And we'll do whatever we think is best.
Right, and that's why it's very, that's why I said this whole process, like, when I was told that I couldn't put that legislation in, I'm like, well, why do I have to go through that extra step with that planning board? It was never done before. And then I look at this and I was like, oh, well, that's why, because now it says it in the law that I have to.
Right.
So that's kind of where I was of why this is so important that we get it right the first time, because I can't keep going back to them and giving them something new, calling for a public hearing, and then,
But
here
I-
we are in June of having to try to amend the legislation.
I also do think, and I don't work for the planning department, I mean, just something to consider, Derek is here, but there's a concern that there is a lot of contradictory amendments, a lot of over amendments, and without any check or balance on changing the zoning code before, different councils did a lot of things that eventually made the zoning code hard to navigate for people.
But, yeah, and that's why I said I really do appreciate
But
this.
that's a real answer to my question then.
Yeah, no, they wanted to clean it up because they said there was too many contradictory things. There was a lot of steps. Some of the steps didn't make sense with the other steps, and it was hard to read. So at least having the planning board or somebody else to consult and make sure it's clean, it stops the rash changes and it makes sure that it's in compliance with the other. whatever.
But we also never had an actual zoning law before. It was always the zoning code where everything was put into place and amended and so on and so forth. So that's why I said I appreciate this, because it is more streamlined, and you're not going to, section 423 of the code, of the city code, trying to amend something. You know what you're amending because everything's in one full document.
And I'm not saying that you're doing it. I say it with all due respect. It's also your responsibility. If you want to make it rash and erratic, not that that's what you're
Right,
doing.
you could.
You can,
Right.
because that's what you're doing.
Right.
They're just saying it's rash and
Right.
erratic. Let's take our time and make sure this is well thought out.
And I guess.
You could say
right.
no.
And I guess my whole point is that having that public hearing puts that extra step in, because it is a public notice, it is giving to the zoning board, and everybody has the right to come speak at that meeting.
And that's when they could.
And we allow them to
express
speak
their
we allow
concern.
them to speak at our public hearings, you know what I mean? I mean, pretty different from that whole
Yeah,
process.
yeah, and actually before we
That's
vote,
the other-
not after we vote.
Right, right.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Council came in 2 minutes after we started. I had a lot of different papers before me.
I just got.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have all this paperwork you have, and I also have a piece of legislation, that's that number 10 ordinance about the license and permits. One piece of information I had before me is page 56, which is the amendment part, and the piece I have is all underlined. Did you do that? And can you tell me what was the purpose of underlining it?
Just so that I can
To
explain
highlight what the process
what the
is?
process is, so that
Oh, okay.
we have to, any recommendation that we give has to go to the planning board, and the planning board gives us a recommendation whether they agree or disagree with us, and we've got to call for the public
The
hearing.
reason I say that
What are you voting on?
is that
What are you voting on?
every time we do anything here, there's two, as all the memos we've had through the years, there are two ways of functioning. There's the executive function and the legislative function. We don't tamper with the executive function. We are the legislature. And so our responsibility is to have a law that is practical and keeps the executive function functioning, and because it's a good legislative format that was laid out by the legislature, which is your function alone. So that's why I asked this. Then I see another piece I have here, the gasoline convenience station.
Yep.
I'm sure you had a purpose for saying that. Why did you underline that?
So what we're trying to do is we're trying to separate.
Definition? Did you do it for definition?
For definition,
You
yes.
know, I think one of the most difficult things I have found in all of this, I find there's just too many definitions. And I don't know what anything really is anymore. They got a license for this and a license for that, and what is it? You know, if you look at a dog, you know it's a dog. If you look at what are these stores? Are they convenience stores? Are they smoke shops? Are they something else? And are they under one set of rules under the code or another set of rules under the code? I have always had difficulty pinning down, in my mind, what we are talking about. And I think at one time I amended the law to show that Mr. Thomas had definitions that conflicted with his definitions. So I tried to correct that to make the definitions sort of line up. And that's why I asked about that. Then I see this other piece. And
Yeah, but can I
where you
interrupt 1 second,
strike
Judge?
the thing, and you're talking about adding, I think, the word smoke shop.
No,
Is that
No.
no?
no.
No, I think, all
Why did you put smoke shop there?
right, hold on 1 second. What was,
Is that you?
I think Councilwoman Colosimo Testa wants to eliminate gasoline/convenience. We want to eliminate the convenience because it's already defined,
Well, it gets in
right,
the
somewhere
second
else
law.
in the code.
Yeah, so
So
ju-
just label it as gasoline station, however we want to label it.
All right, now I
So we want to
understand what you're
eliminate
talking about. Okay,
gasoline/convenience.
that's all, I just want to know.
so the definitions are clear for smoke shops.
understand.
The definitions are clear for
Alright.
neighborhood retail.
This is your function. You-
Gasoline and smoke convenience stores weren't what were defined with that. So back to the original page 56, what we were just talking about, and that's where I guess, you know, if this is something we can do this as a separate piece to make an amendment to that basically just says that after the public hearing and referral to and report by the planning, or excuse me, after a public hearing, a majority of the members of the common council should be required to amend this chapter except as detailed in the protest petition process, which that goes on to go to the bottom one that says if a written protest or proposed amendment supplement changes presented to the common council signed by 20% of the owners or something like that, then you shouldn't do it, which this isn't what we're talking about. We're not talking about a specific change that affects somebody's zoning to their house or anything like that. This is just defining definitions and streamlining the fact that we need to go through more of a process for that. That make sense? Everybody we're on the same page?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right, so then let's go to page, I didn't, let's go to where it says, page 64, district regulations. Everybody got that? Okay, so then you're gonna go to page 66. And I highlighted, neighborhood retail, and smoke shop.
Page 66, the use table.
Yep, so you're also you can actually put it like this,
Yeah.
so you could see page 66 and 67 together, okay?
Yeah,
Like
where-
this.
where- not highlighted, but where are you on this?
What did you highlight? You didn't highlight it.
Well, she highlighted it, but it didn't copy that well, but you could see it.
Okay, so go to page 66, so you're gonna go to, neighborhood retail, and then you're gonna go to smoke shop.
Which is towards the bottom.
And then you're gonna go to page 67, where it says gasoline convenience station, okay?
Yeah.
So what you're gonna have to do, and I think that this is kind of something that we have all been on board with, was changing neighborhood retail and making them all from a permitted use to a special use permit. That it also, now gives the codes department, site plan review, so on and so forth, for anything that goes for neighborhood retail.
So currently, I want to ground this in a real example that will help me.
Sure.
So currently, this is the Stewart situation. The gasoline convenience station requires a special permit,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that doesn't mean that they have to apply for a permit for which they might be denied. See, I find that language very confusing. Right? They don't have to apply, it's permitted. It's just that they're gonna have to get a permit for how they do it, like hours, number of pumps, et cetera.
Yeah, so like if they're going to code for a permit, all we would check is that they meet all of the regulations that are there by the law. We can't say yes or no to the store.
Right.
Right.
See, when I first read that, I thought, oh, they're gonna need a special permit. That's another hoop through which stewards will have to pass before they get to be there, and it turns out no. And I found that, I find that confusing, I don't know.
I mean, I guess, so let's go back. If you were to put a convenience store, for a special use permit in its own definition in any of those, say we put a not a permitted use in neighborhood mixed use or something along those lines for convenience stores only. I mean, it really limits the amount of places that a convenience store could go to. And I guess it goes
With a
to,
gas station.
yeah, I guess that goes to the back of even with a special use permit, where would we be, what would be the definition that if you weren't comfortable with the convenience store going there, where would it become denied?
Well, they would never let me make that decision. It's a legislative and a zoning decision. So like, I can pull it if they don't follow laws, but it's not up to me to be comfortable or not. So my point, if I were you, and this is just my opinion, trying to do what I think you're trying to do, I don't care if you do it, it's just trying to do what I think you're trying to do, is I would just eliminate it altogether in those zones, and then if they want to do it, then they can go to the zoning board of appeals.
And get a variance.
And get a variance. Okay, so let's say, for example, even for gasoline stations, or gasoline, let's take convenience store out of there.
Gasoline convenience station, right?
Let's say we just keep that as special use permit because it's zoned in those areas. Are you saying eliminate that totally and just allow them to go to the
Well, I'm
zoning
not
board?
saying anything about gasoline, I'm talking about neighborhood retail and smoke shops.
Okay, and convenience store,
I
because
would
we'll have to add
eliminate
that
it
as a separate
totally.
motion.
Right. The
Okay.
gasoline is gonna be a problem because, in my opinion, I'm not a lawyer, I wish our lawyers were here, is because there was nothing identified in the zoning study to raise a concern about gasoline shops.
Okay.
So when they went back to sue you for it, you don't have any justification to do it.
Okay.
Whereas with the convenience stores, with the smoke shops, they're saying there's a saturation, which is what you're trying to prevent.
Okay, so then so then I guess from your understanding of your recommendation, where it says neighborhood retail, you just eliminate everything out of that. So it's just,
Yeah, I mean, if you-
it'll just be blank.
If you want to keep it in industrial, I'm fine.
Where's neighborhood convenience? Oh, I see it.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
Or
okay.
it's up to you.
No, and I
Yeah.
agree with that wholeheartedly, because I think that that's the goal that we're trying to accomplish here. So I appreciate you clarifying that's what makes sense to me now, okay? So for neighborhood retail, where all the Ps are, you just eliminate that totally, okay? So it's just blank. Then you go to smoke shop, where all the Ps are, you eliminate those totally.
Neighborhood retail.
Yep,
And then
the last one where it says smoke shop,
where is smoke shop?
The last
Oh,
row.
I see it, okay.
okay? So you
eliminate
take out all the
those.
Ps,
all four.
okay?
Right.
So then what we do is we add convenience store to that, okay? Because there's convenience stores are no longer gonna be along with gasoline stations. You add convenience stores to that and you take out you just leave that blank as well.
You have something with just convenience store.
Yep, yep,
Okay.
yep. You take that out.
And you have has no, it's blank all
It's
the way
blank as
across.
well, yep, with all those columns.
And then what happens to the
You
gasoline
can-
slash convenience store?
So we take out the term convenience store
Yep.
and we just leave gasoline.
So, all right, so with a case like Stewart's, is it is it gonna be judged to be a gasoline station?
It'll be a gas
or
station.
convenience?
It's a
It'll be
gasoline station. Now, what you're saying though, the convenience stores, I don't know that, because after I got the law just now, it's basically, it's neighborhood retail. So
Right.
is it redundant to even have the word convenience store in there at all?
Well, that's another thing that I was talking about when I was combining the definitions of smoke shops, neighborhood retail, and convenience stores.
Now, smoke shops do have a distinct part in that.
Well, and that's why I was adding the definition of what convenience stores are. And then I
That's
guess that you could just use your discretion, you
To-
know what I
to
mean?
figure out what we're talking
what we're
about.
talking about. Because
Yeah.
either way, now that you're not allowing it as a special use permit or a permitted use, they'll have to go in front of the zoning board and
Right.
and state their
And the
case of what
zoning
they
board
actually
can
are.
decide.
And go from there.
So what are people suggesting? So if the gasoline convenience store would now just become gasoline,
Gasoline.
And it's a gasoline outlet because
Right.
just in virtue of having gasoline, regardless of whether or not it has a convenience store attached.
Right.
So any place that sells gasoline is a gasoline, and it doesn't matter whether it's a Stewart's or the place across from the Sones, you said it's just gas. And what are people thinking?
So what you,
How do they want that?
so what I'm saying is that what you can do is you can go to gasoline
Yeah.
and you can keep it under, what's UMU?
Urban mixed use?
Urban mixed use, you can keep that as a special permit. And then if you want, you could eliminate special permit and leave it blank where they would have to go in front of the zoning code no matter what.
And that would be for everything, well, for NMU, but then for what's industrial?
Industrial and industrial
IMU
mixed use.
is- what's
Like commercial,
IMU?
commercial, or, Oriskany
Industrial
Boulevard.
mixed use.
That would be considered industrial mixed use.
So the only one that we could change, we would make it just gasoline,
Yep,
and the only box we would change would be the NMU.
right, which would be neighborhood mixed
And
use.
then it would still be the case that they could go before ZBA to get permission. Now,
Yeah, gotta have one thing. I think it would be premature to add gasoline/electric service station. I'm just saying, it's coming that way. It's coming,
vehicle fueling station,
something.
It'll be a definition.
You're gonna have to eventually put it as a definition, no
Eventually, we're gonna
lie.
have to do
pointing
it,
out
so-
that there is a vehicle charging station.
Right.
Which is, 3 more rows down, or something that just says vehicle charging. But maybe that becomes vehicle fueling station, and it covers both gasoline and.
But the problem is with vehicle charging stations, and Derek can tell you, the problem is with vehicle charging stations.
I was just throwing it out there.
They
We
can
could
be-
change it down the
They
road,
could be
but
a
it's
ca-
But the
coming.
problem with having experience doing them, they can be much more compact than a gas station. So it's like, sometimes people will put vehicle charging stations in their parking lots.
Right,
Yeah.
And.
like Price Chopper.
Yeah, so like you wanna ban them,
And it's always
Not-
accessory use of maintenance. It's
Right,
not
right,
maintenance
right,
like-
right.
yeah.
So,
So I think you should just keep that permit, I
That
think
for
that,
now, and then
I
we
think
can
that we're
work on
going,
it.
we would be going a little too far in
Yeah.
our goal,
Yeah, we
in our
have
goal.
ourselves.
I think keep it separate for now.
so I wanna ask a question then. So when I had suggested back, I don't know, 3-4 meetings ago, when I said, hey, I wanna take these out of NMUs, because I consider NMUs a residential, neighborhood. And you didn't like the idea of that because you thought in your NMUs, because your district is so
Right, it's a
different from
difference. Like
mine.
ours would be State Street wouldn't be able to have.
Right,
They would.
but only through
So,
the ZBA
and
process.
that's where you go back to like spot.
That's- yeah.
You're comfortable
So,
with that?
so here's what I'm trying, I guess this goes back to why the zoning code is important. Because they defined specific parts of the city to get away from spot zoning.
Yes.
Okay? And that's the most important part to this, because technically, according to this legislation, they would be allowed in that, and you wouldn't have anything to say, right? They're
Right.
already a special use permit. What you're doing with neighborhood mixed use is you're just saying, listen, for example, we might not want it to go in front of there, but now because it's a special use permit, the council has no say because this is what there's gonna do. Now you leave it up to the zoning board to say, hey, listen, this is the process that you went through before, this is the, because even in Chuck Marshall admitted in his thing, like, oh, I never had to go through this was easy because it was already permitted use.
Right.
Whereas it wasn't zoned for that, and not necessarily that you didn't, you might not have won against Stewart's, but at least you had that say and to say, hey, listen, this is what the zoning board's gonna do, they're gonna make a decision. And I think that if we're coming, neighborhood mixed use is very delicate, I believe, and it's a very broad term inside our,
And neighborhood mixed
Inside the
uses
zoning
are
code.
gonna, across the city, are gonna really vary from each other, right?
Sure.
So South Utica's neighborhood mixed use is gonna be really different from State Street, is gonna be really different from something. in
right,
North
and
Utica.
And what I just want to say, so everybody here's the other side, it's up to you, but what you're identifying as the bug, the people that wrote the zoning code would identify as a feature, because they want it to be predictable for investors.
Right.
They don't want an investor to look at a site and then be unsure
Right.
if he could acquire it and function as use there. They want an investor to look at our zoning code and say, is this worth me hiring accountants and engineers and making a bid on the sale? And if I do that, can I build my business? What we're saying is, do all of that, then come to the council or this board, and we'll let you know if you can do your business.
And why-
And that's what they tried to avoid.
And why I appreciate that, and I totally understand that that's the process, like, investors are an important part to our duty, right? We want people to invest inside our city, but at the same time, we're not we're not responsible for solely investors. We're responsible for the people that we represent. And for us not to be able to have a say or something like that, like, oh, you can't talk at the planning board meeting or something like that, that's not right for us, and we
But the-
shouldn't have to go through that.
The argument I would make, and this, I'll stop arguing with you, but the argument I would make to that, then get a zoning code and stick behind it so that it's predictable. I'm not arguing what you should let in a neighborhood. I'm saying once you decide to let it,
One way or the
let
other.
it.
I think that makes sense, but I see where you're coming from. The problem is what I just said about MMUs, which is that they vary so much. I mean, maybe at one point with regards to the Stewarts, everybody knows where I stand with the Stewarts. I thought to myself, okay, the stretch of Genesee from Hampton Place to New Hartford line should just be a different kind of zoning than other NMUs around the city. But then, of course, you end up in a situation with the old zoning code, we had 21 different kinds of zoning designations, and that's problematic too.
And this is where the planning board and the city are gonna protect themselves, so they might give us a recommendation that say, hey, neighborhood retail, I agree that it should no longer be a permitted or special use permit, but they'll say, you wanna know what, you might be taking it a little too far when it comes to gas stations, okay? Now, they're gonna be the recommendation, we're gonna say, you wanna know what, you're protecting that right, and that's a decision that we're gonna have to make. So, while I don't disagree with it, it's in some aspect of it, they're gonna be the ones that are protecting themselves by giving that up.
The administration's gonna want more predictable zoning.
Right.
Go ahead, Judge.
May I, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes,
across the street from State Street Mill, there's a Stewart's, right?
yeah,
Very large one.
right,
What is it?
State Street. What is it?
Yeah, what is it?
It's a gas station.
It's a gas station?
Yeah,
It sells food.
right,
It sells groceries. It sells a lot of things. It sells sundries.
I agree.
Yeah, they sell all that. So when I look at that in a zoning law, what is it?
It's a gas station.
A gas station?
Yeah,
And so you're saying that the two definitions combine into one,
the gas pumps make it a gas station.
but then that kind of operation is pretty not only numerous, but it's very common in almost every part of the city.
Yeah,
There's one of those every place.
everywhere.
And I don't think they're really restricted.
No, well, they're restricted, you can't do them in residential, you can do them in neighborhood
Pardon?
mixed use. They're restricted in certain zones. In a residential zone, you couldn't build one on Crestway, for instance.
You could build one on Rucker Street where the old M&M Cleaners was.
Yes,
Yeah, we did that.
I mean, and that's where you should have a say onto whether or not that a gas station should go there. It shouldn't be a special use permit for that permitted area.
My point, Councilwoman, is that I think that what you're doing is very good. You gotta keep talking about this thing till you get in your mind an idea, a formation that fits what you're talking about. And then you find out that it really doesn't fit what you're talking about, because all of these things are so intermixed with each other. I get confused as to just which one
what
you're
it is,
regulating.
here's a better question, what's
And I think
BJ's?
what
That would be retail.
I'm thinking
There's
ahead,
gas pumps.
that when you talk to the
But it was before the
corpor-
zoning code.
Yeah.
Excuse me,
Sorry, Joe.
excuse me, when you get the corporation council in the room, which is gonna happen, I wanna make sure that everybody's on the same page, and any definition that the legislative body agrees on becomes the definition, you see? And that the administration, who is the executive branch that approves it, because the planning board, it's what they're approving. What are you
Right,
approving?
it may be unenforceable, we
Yeah.
don't know that.
What are you approving?
Right.
No. And I say that two things are obvious. When we did the new zoning law, quite a long time, you weren't here then, it was very voluminous, and I think it was a document that was obviously not going to be complete at that time. It was an effort to pass something. Now I think that while you're having these discussions, and there are 6 of you here, that you have to have, I told the majority leader last night, that the Common Council has to have a meeting of their minds to know what they're talking about and have a definition that clearly tells somebody who wants to develop in Utica what category it's in and where it's allowed. And that the planning board, of course, has to work act accordingly. you know, and how do they get there? And I'm the first one to admit that I'm not completely sold on the definitions that I'm hearing as being finalized. But I think the important thing is keep talking. I think you'll hit it if you keep talking. I think this is a very good idea, so that when you have a consensus of ideas that you know what you're talking about. Somebody says to you, what is a gas station and where it can be located, you could say, it's not only just a gas station, they're all convenience stores, really. And where do they belong? And obviously, some are very close to neighborhood residential, because it's required. The people in the neighborhood residential really like to have the gas station not 10 miles away from them. And that's why they are where they are. Maybe they're a little overused too.
Well, they do have a gas station not 10 miles away, they have it a quarter of a mile away, they got three.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that.
But that's the definition of spot zoning.
Yeah, but when you
It's the
say-
definition.
When you say gas station and convenience store, what has more oversight, the gas station or the convenience store?
The convenience, well, it depends on what you mean by oversight. For the city
Oversight
codes,
by DEC, state regulations, federal regulations.
that would be the gas station.
Yes, so that would trump everything, because it's sitting on that premises. That
Yes.
would trump everything, because they shut down the gas station, they're gonna shut down the convenience.
They're gonna
store.
shut down
Right.
everything.
So I think that has more oversight than a regular convenience store, which is IRS and.
It has more oversight.
Yes.
But the problem that we have with the zoning code is that they're permitted or special use permits. So you have to take out that planning component of it and put it back into that zoning. And I have to disagree with the spot zoning, because they're already allowed, okay? So now you say, oh, here we are, we're in neighborhood mixed use, right? And I want to put a convenience store in neighborhood mixed use. And here's another thing that we're going to have to discuss, because let me just finish this point too. So instead of, like, for example, Stewart's on State Street, Stewart's in South Utica, right? Stewart's in South Utica, you could see a Stewart's going there, like, right? It doesn't affect the actual neighborhood. It's not in scenic and historic zone and so forth. Whereas maybe the zoning of it, the zoning aspect of it would say, hey, listen, we'll prove it was already in the zoning code before. I mean, those are things that I guess you're gonna have to take with a grain of salt with this. Now, the only thing that I think that might make sense to what Judge Garamone is saying is that if you look at 2-14, the
Legislation.
legislation that Marcus handed to us. So if you look at the original zoning code that we had prior to the new one being passed, it was called neighborhood convenience, neighborhood retail, or neighborhood, what was it, convenience? Neighborhood retail, or neighborhood convenience retail, or something along those lines. So what hit me on the head, and somebody had mentioned it earlier, where it said, well, why are you adding convenience stores to the definition of the legislation? So we can do this one or two ways. So it's in the neighborhood retail certificate use, okay, we're either gonna have to amend that part of the code and add convenience stores to the legislation, or we can come to an agreement as the body and we amend it to say neighborhood retail establishment, and that's considered convenience stores, and we just take out the permitted use for it, and they have to get a zoning amendment to it. So I don't know how much you want to limit that, and maybe add the definition of convenience stores to the neighborhood certificate use, where it says it's owner, proprietor, neighborhood, what it actually means. But I guess in all, neighborhood retail establishment is kind of what the definition of convenience stores actually was.
Yes, and the reason why they narrowed that is because, to be frank, they found some convenience stores being more creative to avoid the licensing process.
So I think that
Can
we,
you give us an example of that?
Sure, so if,
the corner of Rucker and,
well, that
I mean-
one, right, they add an accessory
Right.
structure. Now it adds an accessory structure, it increases the square footage, it can't do it.
Right.
So neighborhood retail right now, as we defined it, we would say it's the same as a convenience store, so she's right, because it has to sell food, beverages, and dry goods. So Katie just gave me an example. I don't want to, call out a specific business, but I think it's fine. Say Roma's, say Utica Coffee, right? They're basically selling food and beverage as their primary way of making business. They're not selling household cleaning products.
Right.
They're not selling, so that would make it what we call a neighborhood retail. Because the more we narrow that definition, the more you allow the convenience store to be creative, so now it doesn't serve hot food.
So then we should keep it separate as convenience store.
You could, I like neighborhood retail that's broader. That's my personal, it's broader, so I can apply
But then
it.
you're right to say, I guess, something like Roma's, right?
Yeah,
You
but-
don't want to, you don't want to say Roma's is a convenience
Well,
store.
read
Or,
the definition in that law out loud, just for the
What did you
record,
say?
for the neighborhood to.
yeah, it says shall mean a retail sales business with less than 6,000 square feet of gross floor area devoted in whole or part to the sale of dry goods and food and beverages, consumer goods and prepared foods, food sales to be used and consumed primarily off the premise, shall exclude establishments that dispense gasoline and other
So
motor
all
vehicle
five of
fuel.
those things, dry goods, beverages, consumer products, all five of those have to be included for it to be neighborhood retail. You see, and it has to be primarily off premises. So that would exclude Roma, because Roma doesn't sell all five of those things.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So I think then that we're maybe just better off just keep, so
So
that
that's
we're
why
not
service
really
establishment?
convoluting the definitions of what they already are. I think that if we just take out the permitted uses and let them go in front of the zoning board, that's our best bet.
It's not a- that's a-
See, for structuring, what you do, the best kind of structuring is you have a caption. And under the caption, you have A, B, C, and D, and F, or how many you have to have. Because under that caption is everything you could think of that meets that definition at the top. That way you don't have to go fishing all through your,
Code.
statute. Now, you take a good example, and you keep mentioning, because it's in the third district, the Stewart's on Genesee Street. Well, the Stewart's on Genesee Street is not a good thing to keep pointing at, because Stewart's on Genesee Street, all the background is that it's across the street from a gas station.
That's not the only background.
Now, wait, I just said, it's across the street from a gas station. So, if the property is private, and they sell it, it's you're not gonna take it out of any definition, because it's already in the definition, because you got a gas station across the street, unless you're gonna say from this date, well, we should have been before, that we wouldn't have another one. But you're gonna have another one, and, you got a railroad track next to it. So that, to a reviewing body says, well, what are you talking about? This is exactly where it should be. And,
Yeah.
and so, the definition in a city now of when residential ends and begins is a little bit blurred because of the times. You know,
Right, and that's why I think that taking convenience stores away from that
Well,
gas
if you-
station
yeah.
component and putting that into that
well, I agree with one thing.
neighborhood retail.
Gasoline stations, where they sell gasoline, should be as far away from residential properties as you can make it. That was the big mistake in the first place, 'cause that's how you lost the ones up on, off of, Oneida Street, because of the old
Well-
station leak.
Higby and Arlington.
That is a pollution problem, it's a danger problem, and there's all kinds of things that, it isn't the kind of place you wanna have next to a good residential area.
Yeah, the
One
thing,
is sort of
Can
in
I-
an area where there are other things, like maybe a grocery store or something nearby, like where Price Chopper is. And so, I say, pick your heading, and then put underneath what you want your heading. And maybe gasoline stations, you were right the first time, should be in a separate category, all those stuff, because it is a different item. It's not selling bread and cookies you're worried about.
Right.
It has gasoline,
Right.
gasoline tanks there.
Can I,
and don't we have convenience stores, the 2,000 square foot rule?
Yes, we
So
just
If
added
we
that
have
in.
that now, how
Yeah,
could
we
he?
got that.
How could he,
We've got
how
that.
could that be classified as a convenience store when there's one right across the street within the 2,000 foot?
Correct.
range?
And I think that this also has to look back to the fact that, and this is obviously, this discussion has been long before Stewart's
what?
put their application in for convenience stores.
All right, yeah, I need to go right back to what Frank just said. If the Speedway is a convenience store and the new proposed Stewart's is a convenience store, then even as it stands now, they simply can't, because we already have a 2,000-foot rule.
Well, because it's gas station convenience
Because
stores.
it's
They would both
gasoline.
have pumps. So that's what,
But they're also both convenience.
that's why we have to,
Right.
that's why
See,
we
we
have to
haven't
take,
labeled it,
that's
yeah.
why we have to take convenience out of gas
Okay.
stations. So here's my recommendations to the council so that we can summarize this. So I think my original definition for a convenience store should be eliminated. I think that we should keep it as neighborhood retail as far as what we're considering, as far as what we're considering convenience stores. My next recommendation would be to go to the definition of gasoline convenience store, eliminate convenience right out of it, and just have gasoline station, okay? Then you go to the table, and you say where it says neighborhood retail, you take out all the Ps. You go to smoke shop, you take out all the Ps. Then you go to gasoline, you take out,
Wait a second, slow down.
Oh, sorry.
Neighborhood retail, take out all the Ps.
Yep.
Smoke shops, take out all the Ps.
Yep.
Yeah, just leave them
And then go
blank.
down to
They're
gasoline
required to-
convenience store, and now it really just says gasoline,
yep,
right?
yep,
And
Well-
you take out the SPs?
yep, no.
No,
Y-
only the
so-
SP under
Ma-
NMU.
NMU.
Okay, all right, hey, I'm, no surprise,
I'm all in favor of this, since this is sort of, although it's more expansive, you're doing other things at the same time. This is what I sort of proposed a while ago, that we amend the zoning ordinance to get the SP out of the NMU for gas stations.
Right, and I
You're
think.
doing a little bit more, which is great.
Because we couldn't, I think that at the end of the day, it had to come down to is that we had to figure out what to do with convenience stores. And I think that the definition of leaving it in neighborhood retail, leave you guys up with the leeway, along with zoning and them, to be able to do what they want with what they approve and what they don't approve.
So are you gonna write this legislation up for the next meeting?
Yeah,
and
I'll have
then-
it, I should have it,
and
what's
then-
today, Wednesday? I have Friday off, so I'll have it to everybody
And
by
then we
Friday to
stick
look
it
over
in
for the weekend.
committee and ask the clerk to send it to the planning board.
Yes,
And ask them for their recommendation.
and call for the public
Yeah,
hearing.
let
And
the
call for a
judge
public-
take a look at it, and
Right,
whoever
right,
else.
right.
And you
And
guys
what we
also
should
have-
do also is extend, the
Right, for next
moratorium,
meeting, we'll have the
30, 60
moratorium
days,
thing.
whatever it
Right,
takes.
right. So, okay, before I forget, I want to, this is a little bit different, but a little bit not. So we passed a local law which gives each of us the right to speak at planning boards and scenic and historic. We already have the right to speak at ZBAs because they're always public hearings. I'm hearing a rumor that because those boards are allowed to make their own rules of order, they can decide when we can speak. And what I'm hearing is that they're going to pass their rules of order to not let us speak until after they've taken their vote. Which goes around the spirit of the law, right? Even if it sticks to the letter of the law. I'd like to bring a resolution, a non-binding resolution to the floor next week, asking that we ask them kindly, respectfully, to please let us speak before they take their vote. Would people be willing to pass that resolution?
I think everybody agreed with the local law. I don't
Yeah.
see why that wouldn't be an issue.
So everybody's good with
Resolution
that?
done.
All right, so I'm gonna bring that next week, and I'm not gonna promise to get it in by Thursday, but I'll do what I can.
So, before we move on, and before we close, so we adjourn this meeting, please tell me what questions that you have that I could answer, because this is on a time constraint, especially
Mhm.
with the moratorium. And I just need to know, before I move forward, that this is I'll make a motion that what we agreed to tonight gets recommended to the council, with a vote, so that I'm not wasting,
Yeah.
anybody's
I'll-
time,
I'll
especially the
vote
planning
for
board,
this.
zoning
Yeah.
board.
Yeah, but the only thing that concerns me is that we gotta make sure everything's legal, what we're
Yep.
doing legal, so we'll have to have, obviously, the judge and maybe the city attorneys look at it to make sure we're legal. But what I like, maybe Marcus could let Corporation Council know, this is being taped, so they could listen to our meeting, what we're planning on doing, and if they have any recommendations, maybe we'll have the clerk tell her to review anybody to review what our meeting was all about, and maybe we can get the ball rolling that way as well. You know what I mean? It's just
Right.
like-
Their issue.
Then you know what's coming, instead
Right.
of,
Yeah.
it'll
Their
save
issue
some
is
time.
gonna be Corporation Council. So if there's any issue with this, and I don't know, I'm not psychic, but just being there knowing, the convenience store and the gas station, they'll look as separate. Their issue is gonna be grouping the three things together, because they feel like, based on the zoning study, they would have justification to address the convenience stores, but no impetus for the gas station other than the common council wanting to do it reactive to a recent situation. So,
Wait, to go back, so what are we lumping? Because we're still keeping smoke shops separate.
no, what I'm saying is,
We're
if you do this all as one piece of legislation,
No, they're gonna be individual.
they're gonna be
yeah.
three, one for smoke shops, one for neighborhood retail, one for,
Yes.
then they're fine.
Yep.
And you can put smoke shops and retail together, because they're both in that licensing.
We're also amending the law, so a
Ye-
local law, so it has to be done
Yeah.
separately.
Right, okay.
So
their
that's why,
issue would
and
be
that's
the
why I
cluster.
said,
They, because they would have a different,
it comes to my, it's literally, I think it comes out of my desk because it's at every single meeting.
Yeah.
The
What's
only
the
thing.
local
I
law
had
we're
one other,
amending?
yeah.
So, what's that?
What's the local law we're amending?
This is the law.
Mhm.
that's a law.
It's a law.
It's an ordinance.
No, it's law. I mean, technically you ordain it,
The
but
zoning
it's
law is a law.
Okay.
So,
Oh, yeah.
no, go ahead.
No, sorry, I'm gonna, Derek, if, I was curious, any thoughts from Urban and Economic, if you wanted to chime in or wait?
I think if you put in convenience stores and you keep it in neighborhood retail, because neighborhood retail is so broad of definition, it doesn't need to meet all 5 criteria to be considered a neighborhood retail, like the consumer goods, the food, the beverages. It can be 1, 2, or 3 of those things, or all 5.
Right.
But if someone comes in front of us and they want to open up a deli, if it's under 6,000 feet, we're going to consider it neighborhood retail.
Oh, right.
If you take it out of every single district as permitted by right, it's going to put quite a bit of administrative burden
On the
reviewing
ZBA.
every single application for that.
And
Well,
I-
like places like Roma, if another person wanted to open up an exact same business,
Sure.
you would be.
But that's, and you might want to do convenience store, read the law and get your interpretation. My understanding with Elan, when we wrote this law,
Yep.
was that they did have to meet all 5 of those things. Because we were trying to justify it to address what we were concerned about. And I think the law says and, not or.
No, it's not. The definition as you read it doesn't. It says it can be whole or part of any of these things in the definition of neighborhood.
It says whole or part, so maybe then that's the.
That's in the
language.
certificate of use,
Right,
not in the actual definition of the zoning code.
of the zoning code.
Right.
Right, but we're talking about whether we want to call it neighborhood retail or a smaller category called convenience stores.
So, and it says in whole or part 2, so that's why taking that out of there, that's gonna still be up to them to approve that, whether it's considered a whole, all those 5 components together or not.
Or a part, because the business that we worked with Elan was Utica Coffee. And they said, write this so it doesn't include Utica Coffee. The consumption off premises, and then.
There's usually a cafe definition.
Then the 5 characteristics. How does this not apply to that? And they said the 5 characteristics. But you're right, if it says whole or part, then that's the language that changes, because the question's gonna be then, how do you define convenience store?
Yeah.
And it's gonna be the same problem.
I think the issue with neighborhood retail is it has too many uses that fall under.
You're on the money, understand?
So he wants a subcategory with convenience stores that say anything that considers all of these 5 categories is a convenience store?
And here's the thing that I'm just gonna point out. So prior to the zoning code being passed, that was the definition of that.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. So there's no, I mean, we didn't burden the city with that prior to this local law being passed. We're just kind of reverting back to what the definition of neighborhood retail was.
Right.
Which included convenience stores. Does that make sense? Okay, I mean, and we could put, and what we would have to amend this ordinance, to include convenience stores. So instead of neighborhood retail establishment, I
Then you
mean,
would have to define convenience store.
you would hit,
And what I was told, and I could be completely wrong, I like it, but maybe, right, there's a different codes commissioner, he's a jerk. I think I know what the licensing was intended to license. And in my opinion, in implementing the law, you have to give us enough latitude, because they can just do one thing.
Right.
So you have to, the definition has to be broad enough. I'm not an idiot.
Right,
If,
right.
if there's a deli opening up, I'm not considering it neighborhood retail.
and not for nothing, you had to add the definition of smoke shops because they were turning convenience stores into smoke shops.
Into smoke shops.
So, do you get what I'm saying? So I think that we're covering all bases by keeping it under it, and I originally started with the convenience store thought. But I think that this, not giving those permitted uses or special use permits, protects what the intent of we're trying to do. Does that make sense?
It just
Yep.
depends.
Okay.
I'm not
Does
gonna
anybody
make
else have any
Utica Deli
questions?
get a license.
No, it's okay, you're
No,
gonna put
can
it
I
together.
can I say one
Sure.
thing?
Yeah.
So the next Utica Historic Commission, I'd love if the at-large were there, because you also have the right to speak that. I don't know if you want to speak, but I do feel like there's.
28th, correct?
There's this way in which they're really preparing to just ignore our law.
There's gonna be one person that's not gonna want me there, so you're better off not having me there.
Okay, so if Frank and Mark could join us, then.
It'd only hurt you, but I appreciate it. And nobody else has any questions?
Yep.
We're all good? Okay, make a
Meeting
motion to
adjourned.
adjourn.
Thank you all.